Hideo Kojima, the brains behind the Metal Gear series. It invented the stealth genre and absolutely messed with the heads of anyone who played it. But there was a time when this iconic series was close to never happening. Firstly, when he joined Konami in 1986, the only thing he was good at was coming up with ideas. But at the time, game designers did a little bit of everything, so Kojima was considered by many as one-dimensional. After a couple of games including Penguin Adventure and Lost World, which would end up being cancelled, he was on the brink of losing his job but was given one last chance by Konami to prove himself. The original plan for Kojima was to make an action game like Contra, but because the MSX2 wasn't a very powerful computer being able to show only 4 character sprites on screen at the same time, that was simply out of the question. So Kojima went to his love of movies for a solution, and he got it. Taking inspiration from Escape from New York and The Great Escape, this game slowed things down. You have to take a subtle approach and use weapons as little as possible. There was no video game like this, but as you'd expect from Konami, especially today, they hated the idea because it was boring compared to Contra, but was eventually greenlit after Kojima convinced the bosses that it would be successful if they released it. Metal Gear was released for the MSX2 in 1987. And look, it's Kyle Reese from The Terminator. Another perfect example of Kojima's love for movies. Wrong, actually, because Kojima was fairly new to Konami at the time, he had nothing to do with the front cover. But if he did, I can imagine Kyle Reese still acting as Solid Snake. The MSX2 computer wasn't sold outside of Japan, so even if the game was a critical success, it wouldn't get any recognition internationally. But it was successful enough in Japan to make Kojima valuable to Konami. It took 19 years for a release outside of Japan with Metal Gear Solid 3 subsistence. We're using the Metal Gear Solid HD collection on the PlayStation 3 to look at the MSX2 classic. Although there was an NES version for international audiences where the Metal Gear was replaced with typos, it paled in comparison to Kojima's original. The MSX version is the one we're looking at. When I played Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation for the first time, and whenever I played another, my first impression was that the controls were really complicated and it was highly cryptic. I had to use a walkthrough numerous times just to know what I was doing, and it's the main reason why I've decided to start reviewing the entire Metal Gear series from where it all began. Set in the year 1995, Solid Snake is a rookie Special Forces group foxhound sneaking into a base to save hostages and destroy Metal Gear, which is meant to be some sort of super weapon. Why are the hostages in random rooms? Why can't they be in jail cells like Gray Fox? There must be a lot of spies going after these guys. Kojima, the movie nut that he is, Metal Gear was one of the only video games during the 8-bit era, not an RPG, to have deep storytelling. It's definitely an interesting plot setting on wars and conspiracy, which were incredibly unique for an 8-bit action game. The first thing you're told is locate Gray Fox and destroy Metal Gear, only there's a lot more going on than meets the eye with twists and turns expected. I mean, storytelling was well ahead of its time. There's a reason for everything, and all the traits the series are known for were introduced here. Just be careful because you can skip the text with the D-pad, which is something I always do by accident. Speaking of screwed up annoyances, when you reach the gas zone, you have to use a gas mask to avoid losing health. But in order to get past the room, you have to swap the mask for a keycard, which means you lose health and it's impossible not to. It would have helped if you could use 2 items at once. The MSX had plenty of buttons to use, I'm sure it would have worked. But aside from those irritations, Metal Gear is a pretty fun stealth game. Even despite its complex story, it's still an 8-bit video game, which means you can just pick it up and play it. The only thing Solid Snake has at his disposal is a pack of cigarettes, which has become a staple in the series. I think we already know what they're usually for. Warning Snake, they may be hazardous to your health. Because you start with only cigarettes, you have to constantly search for anything you can get your hands on while finding the hostages. The weapons are usually for the boss battles. When it comes to sneaking around the base, those enemies can be taken down with your fists. And boy can they spot you quickly. And their bullets are incredibly biased. Did I mention being a pixel away from the enemy still means you miss your shot? I would say that Metal Gear qualifies as a Metroidvania. You can't reach certain points unless you backtrack and find the correct keycard numbers, bomb suits, parachutes, and weapons. Every time you go past a different screen, the enemies respawn, or maybe they get patched up really quickly all the time. This is an enemy that doesn't screw around after all. It can be tedious trying to do the same thing time and time again, so it's inevitable you'll get caught. Like Dark Souls, you'll be dying a lot, and it's all about trial and error. Every time Snake dies, you're taken back to when you were last on an elevator. I'm surprised the codec doesn't go apeshit. That can be a bit of a problem if you've made plenty of progress and have to do it all over again. But apart from the gassed areas, gameplay wise it's mostly fair. The enemy placement in rooms, whether you sneak past or take down, I have no problem with that. And unlike the NES version, you don't go all the way back to the start when you die, nor do you have to put in a long password. This version you can save at any time, but it only loads on the elevator and on occasion close to a boss battle, which is reasonable enough. But there is one really annoying flaw, which I'm probably going to get a bit of dislike for saying this because it's also considered a series staple. How cryptic it is. It's funny, I want to review the entire Metal Gear series starting with the MSX titles, hoping I can get the hang of it, being that these are Kojima's first couple of attempts at stealth games. I definitely underestimated him because it's just as confusing as the Metal Gear Solid titles we're used to today. If you miss just one piece of information, sentence from someone, or miss a call, you will have no chance of beating this game. It's not like you can call back to say, "What was the first thing you said?" Oh. There was one part where after you save a hostage, you get a new contact named Jennifer. She will have a rocket launcher placed in a particular room using a keycard you don't have yet. But if you don't call her as soon as you leave that room where you save the hostage, the rocket launcher won't be there and you're in deep shit. And there are plenty of moments like these where the trial of error is microscopic. The kindest way to conclude how cryptic it is, if you don't want to use a walkthrough, you will need to put a lot of time into this game and pay super attention to what the characters say. 95% of the time. Yeah, there will also be moments when the information will be unreliable, and that's where the twists and turns in the story come into play. But after relying on it for so long, realizing that it might be bogus is one of the last things I'll consider. I like you, Kojima. You've proven that you can write fantastic stories time and time again, but that was a troll move on your part. If you're a Metal Gear Solid fan interested in how it all began, or looking to get into the Metal Gear series as a whole, it's a decent way to start. The controls are a lot more simplistic than future titles, it doesn't take a lifetime to beat like the Phantom Pain, and it's a welcome introduction to Solid Snake even if he isn't voiced by David Hayter. But for the beginners, be careful, it will screw with your head. Some of you might like that, but to me the last hour of gameplay wasn't particularly fun, though it was satisfying seeing the Metal Gear weapon get taken down. The MSX version of Metal Gear gets a 6.5 out of 10, and also a 7.5 out of 10 specifically for die-hard Metal Gear Solid fans. Yes, even if it's the first title in the series, you have to be experienced in stealth games to get the most enjoyment out of Metal Gear. Sure, it's no 21st century Metal Gear Solid masterpiece, but Hideo Kojima wouldn't even have a job in video gaming if not for this. Speaking of that, Kojima was finally able to prove to Konami that he was a valuable asset to the company and left the series to work on something else. Yeah, really. But he didn't seem to understand that he was working for a business, and because Metal Gear was successful, he would have to create another, although today that would actually mean it would be cancelled. Konami, right? That review will be out soon.